Well, Wednesday was another terrible day for financial markets. The NASDAQ is now officially 30% down. It's like exactly 30%. It's like, I did the math, it's like the current value of the NASDAQ is like 0.700003% or 70.0003% of the all-time high value of the NASDAQ. Basically 30% down. The S&P is like 81.6% of the all-time high value, meaning it's down, 18.4%. So, like I said, that 17 to 20% range is where we should see the Fed flip-flop. Well, we didn't have Fed speakers come out today. We'll put it that way. We had Waller, who was very, very mildly dovish. He gave markets just a glimmer of hope, but I said yesterday that could have been a fluke. It's not necessarily at the beginning of the flip-flop. But who knows? Maybe the Fed wanted to stay quiet today to see, hey, you know what? Maybe if we just fed them this little breadcrumb with Waller saying that, hey, this isn't going to be like Paul Volcker, which I didn't even realize yesterday. I forgot to mention that. That was his big takeaway. That was the big quote from Waller, is that pretty much what Powell's doing, Powell's not the next Volcker. And, of course, Paul Volcker raised Fed funds to like 20%. We know Powell would never do that, so it's a nothing statement to throw out there. Jerome Powell does not need to be Paul Volcker to bring about the end of America. If he raised the Fed funds rate to 5%, he wouldn't be Paul Volcker. He'd be Alan Greenspan. But it would still destroy the country. Now, I guess maybe in a somewhat positive silver lining for today, we'll put it that way. The 10-year was taking a little bit of a break. It's down below 3% again. It's at 2.95-ish. I think it was right at about 3 yesterday. And if you recall, the 10-year is, that's the benchmark interest rate, more important than Fed funds when it comes to really global financial markets. But when it comes to borrowing money, anything like that, borrowing costs, mortgage rates, the 10-year is the most important number to watch. When that moves, all the interest rates in the economy move. And so, for that not to be going to the moon today, you can say, it wasn't that bad of a day. The 10-year is not at 4%. I can say that, surely. So I guess it's not that bad of a day. But the S&P is on track. We have only 2 days left in this week, so maybe we won't be in a bear market this week. Maybe it'll come next week. Yesterday's slight intervention from the Fed kept yesterday from being as bad of a day as it might have been. And so maybe without the Fed coming out and giving those little glimmers of hope, maybe the S&P would have been in a bear market this week. I don't want to say that it won't be. I mean, it still very well might be. Again, it's less than 2% away. We're at, as of right now, the so-called correction is 18.4% by my math below all-time highs. So that makes it only 1.6% away from a bear market. Now, in inflation news, we got the CPI number for April today, and that came in at 8.3%, which was higher than expected. Big shock. Inflation was higher than expected. But don't worry. This inflation print, we're told, is bullish because inflation is topping, because it's not as high as March inflation. March CPI was 8.5%. And lo and behold, April was only 8.3%. Now that means inflation is no longer a problem, and we can get back to normal, right? Maybe that's why the 10-year was down, or, the 10-year yield was down today. Maybe this is proof, the Fed doesn't have to keep hiking as much because inflation's already topped. Now it's going to start coming down, and then we can all get back to normal and send stonks higher and higher. But, of course, the stock market itself did not react that way. And you know what? I forgot to check the shadow stats numbers. I wonder if the shadow stats inflation data is higher or lower than March. That would have been interesting, because I wouldn't be shocked if official CPI is lower than March, but the unofficial shadow stats number, the old-timey inflation data, is higher than March. Because the Fed and the government have great incentive to understate inflation. We all know that. That's why they rigged the numbers to make inflation look as low as possible. And even with those really, really, understated inflation numbers, people still realize, hey, inflation's really going up across America. And, if I were the Democrats, I would want to get this out of the way as soon as possible. I would be urging, Powell to hike faster, hike sooner, get inflation under control by the time of the midterms. I mean, I think, be conservative about it. You don't have to be nuts and go all the way to 5%. I think the Fed should have hiked all the way to 2% in one go. And yes, that would have tanked the stonk market. But if we could have reined in inflation, it might have been worth it. So I'll tell you what. I'm no PhD economist. Not that that would make me a genius. I'm a layman. But even I realize, you know what? If you've got a problem with inflation, negative interest rates probably aren't going to help you. Because if you've got high inflation, you want people to start saving money rather than spending it. And how are you going to get people to save their money when they have negative interest rates? That just doesn't really click. And that's something that Paul Volcker understood well. He was a common sense guy. Why Paul Volcker is the only Fed chairman I've ever liked. Obviously I wasn't alive back then, but in studying the history, monetary policy in the United States, Paul Volcker stands out. But Waller made it clear that Powell is no Volcker, as if we needed any confirmation as far as that's concerned. And so if I were the Fed, I would be seeing the 10-year yield go down, and I would be concerned, because you want to get the 10-year up, because it's a chicken or the egg thing. Do you want interest rates to be higher than the high rate of inflation? Or do you want the high rate of inflation to come down so that it's below where the interest rates are? How are you going to achieve positive interest rates? Well, if the problem is you got high inflation and you can't control that, I think you got to get interest rates above inflation. I know, crazy concept. The way to achieve positive interest rates is to push interest rates above the rate of inflation. Crazy. But if I were at the Fed, which of course I never would be, there's no way I could survive in that kind of a work environment. They would have sniffed me out long before I would. I don't think I'm good enough at being fake to work in a place like that. But if I was at the Fed, if I was in Jerome Powell's shoes, I would make it clear, hey, the way out of this is positive interest rates. And just by saying that, you're going to push up interest rates without even really moving Fed funds. Because what is Fed funds? Fed funds is the Fed's way of telling the market, how they feel. But the Powell can come out and jawbone very easily. I mean, he was able to jawbone stocks higher for years. He can jawbone interest rates positive in real terms. If Powell comes out and says, hey, you know what? I think that the 10 years should be above the rate of inflation, he can get it there with words alone. Because the market will respond. They take him seriously. But the problem is with inflation being 8.3% as of last month, and that's in official CPI terms. In actual terms, it's well into double-digit territory. That would mean if the 10-year yield went that high, that would mean that the United States is over. And you know what? There was a time where the U.S. could handle it. Back in the Carter years, when Paul Volcker was installed as the Fed chairman by Jimmy Carter. And I believe the actual big hikes started to occur once Reagan was president. I wouldn't really give, I don't think either of them can really take credit. I mean, it was Volcker. I don't know if Jimmy Carter really understood what Volcker was going to do when he got in there. But, who knows? I mean, Jimmy Carter was in a similar position to Biden. He had this persistent inflation that, Jimmy Carter inherited, to be quite honest. And he was at wit's end, and he brought Volcker in, and he said, hey, do whatever you think is necessary. Just get rid of the inflation. And Volcker did that, arguably ending Jimmy Carter's career. But back then, the federal government wasn't so indebted that it couldn't take it. The federal government was able to handle those high rates back then. They wouldn't now. We'd just be done. The whole country would be done. Everything is so far in debt. Nobody talks about that anymore. The debt matters when debt becomes expensive. When debt's cheap, who cares? Everybody go into debt. But debt is only cheap because of the Fed. And the Fed, if there ever gets to be a problem of inflation like we have now, the way of dealing with that is by making debt expensive. Because when debt is expensive, what does that encourage? It encourages savings. So this really isn't that hard to understand, is that everybody wants to have everything, both ways. So, I think I'll leave that there, and I will move into a third topic for today. I know it's been rare that I ever do that. Even when I say to myself, I want to talk about two things today, I only talk about one. So first topic was stocks. Second topic, what was I just talking about? Oh, inflation. So we did stocks, we did inflation, kind of closely related. Something that has nothing really to do with any of those, the January 6th trials. There was something that I witnessed today. I did not watch the trial or the hearing live, but I read about it. Plenty of it. I saw it on Twitter. Apparently, a judge tricked an unsuspecting, uninitiated layman into entering a not guilty plea, purposefully, so that this person would have to go to trial, face a harsher charges, and lose their plea deal that they were being offered by the federal government, in connection with the January 6th stuff. Now, a lot of people are making fun of this guy because, he's Baked Alaska, who is not somebody who I'm a fan of, not somebody who I have respect for. I think he seems like a pretty shitty guy. Just a, kind of a typical douchebag, kind of person that you would, if I don't have a sister, but if I did, and I ever saw her hanging around with somebody like Baked Alaska, it'd be pretty hard to avoid getting into a fight. And I'm not the fighting kind of guy. I just, look at him, and he's a sleazeball. Can't stand him. But hey, he owns it. That's his brand. So, if you like those kind of people, you can watch him. I don't care. But I say all that. I insult the man to say to give myself some credibility here when I say I think that what just happened to him was terrible, and it's just an example of how awful and twisted these January 6th judges are, and how just how much they're willing to abandon any sense of justice and objectivity. I mean, the only reason why the judge used reverse psychology to trick Baked into saying that he was innocent. That's what happened. So he entered his plea, he said not guilty, and the judge basically said, so why are you pleading guilty, kid? And he said, well, the prosecutor told me that if I don't plead guilty, he'll charge me with something worse. He said, and so the judge says, oh, so you think you're innocent? And Baked goes, well, yeah, of course I think I'm innocent. Oh, okay, we're going to enter a not guilty plea. Here's your trial date. Have fun with no lawyer. And even if you could afford a lawyer, you're not going to find a decent lawyer willing to represent you in these January 6th cases. I mean, all these people, they're Stalinist show trials. Justice is dead in America. And this judge didn't want Baked to get the plea deal. And so the judge blew it up. I mean, this guy's sick. I mean, I have to be really careful. One, because I'm on YouTube. Two, because this is a federal judge. And as I've learned this week, as a result of the protests against the Supreme Court justices over Roe v. Wade, apparently there are laws specifically that protect federal judges from, people exercising their free speech. Because, if you are seen as trying to intimidate a judge about an ongoing case, that is considered obstruction of justice. So I can't step into the realm of obstructing justice by trying to intimidate this judge. But all I'll say is I don't know how people like to sleep at night. You know, no matter how much you hate somebody like this, you know, it's not like he's a murderer. It's not like he's being charged with rape, although from what I've heard, it is a bit. The question is up in the air as to whether or not Baked Alaska is a rapist. But what he did here, this is, no matter what you think of it, these people walked around inside of a building, and they're pulling out all the stops to try and put people like Baked Alaska away for 40 years in prison, or 50 years, or whatever they can get out of them. You know, you've heard of mandatory minimums. They're going for the maximum. Mandatory minimums don't matter here. We always hear about how terrible mandatory minimums are because people who get, you know, charged and aren't really, you know, that bad of people get put away for 30 years for having an ounce of cocaine or something, or I guess an ounce is a lot, like a gram of cocaine. You know, but here we have a judge doing everything he can to make sure that, because he knows, okay, if this goes to trial, obviously this guy's going to be found guilty, because this is a court in D.C. He's going to have a D.C. jury, or he's going to have a bench trial. Either way, they're going to convict him, even if he could afford a lawyer or something like that, you know. And it's not like there's any doubt as to whether or not he was in the Capitol. You know, he was live streaming, so, you know, that part they got, and that's enough for them. Oh my gosh, you were in the Capitol? Well, that's just like you're just like a Confederate. You're an armed insurrectionist. And so there you go. You know, you should be hanged in the town square for the crime of treason. And so that's all this judge did. This judge clearly is trying to lynch him, not because, you know, he really knows who Baked Alaska is. Probably doesn't. He just knows Baked Alaska is one of these January 6th people, and he wants them to be punished as severely as possible. He has a deep-seated hatred for ordinary Americans who get too uppity. And so, you know, he's using his position as, you know, the guy in charge of the courtroom. When you come into the court, you're in the judge's house, and he knows the rules. You don't know the rules. He sets the rules, and he can use those rules to manipulate you into doing whatever he wants. And so while, you know, it's easy to, my first reaction is, okay, Baked, he's just a dumbass. You know, he fell for it. He said he was innocent, and during his plea, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. But it's like, no, I mean, I've never been in this position. That would be probably the worst moment in his life. I don't know, maybe he's been charged with a crime before. I don't know, I haven't. So for me, this would be the worst moment in my life. Standing up there in front of a judge, having to say that I'm guilty, you know, of a crime when I don't feel like I did anything wrong. And you're very, very nervous. Your head, I guarantee you, when he got out of that courtroom, he didn't know what he was saying. The judge was able to persuade him. This is a very vulnerable person in this kind of state. And I would say it if it was anybody else. You know, like I said at the beginning, I don't think Baked Alaska's a good guy. But nobody deserves to be treated this way. Even if they were a murderer. If they were a murderer and they were trying to plead guilty, and you tricked them because they were persuadable and really stressed out into pleading not guilty just so that they could go to a trial that they know they'll lose, this judge would still be a piece of shit. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.